Push it live on YouTube. Okay, here we go. Episode 3, Effin' Growth Podcast. Today, we're talking all about how you can take your technical knowledge to the next level. We've talked about how to hire and plan for growth. We've talked about how to sell yourself. Today, we're talking about how to expand your Webflow skill set in the technical side of things so that you can take those websites, client projects, and your agency to the next level. But before we get too far into this, let's Effin' Grow. Okay, Joe, how we doing? We got some viewers on YouTube. What's up in the house? What are we talking about today?
We are talking about technical knowledge, helping you grow your sales and your professional career inside Webflow. We are going to talk all about what technical skills are, why they're important in Webflow, and how you can use them to grow. Before we get into that, let's get to some updates. The very first update is we have.
Hang on one second. We gotta set the mood for these.
I'm too excited.
Just a little bit. Joe is too excited here. We're gonna set the mood just a second for a little bit of Now we got okay. Now we can go to the updates. What's up, everybody? With a little bit of smooth jams. Let's get the screen up and tell us what's going on, Joe. What's up with this updates?
Webflow released a merch store, and we were selected to create a t-shirt. We also wanted to take this a step further and go create a course around something cool you can do with Webflow e-commerce. So we created G-Tag for Webflow e-commerce. This is going to help you use G-Tag, Google Analytics, to give enhanced e-commerce tracking data to your Webflow e-commerce site. This is super powerful. It does help increase your technical skills, and it's going to be a service that you can resell to your clients. Really powerful. We're super pumped about this. We had a 1-month sprint team-wide to go and get this live. So we're really happy to go and release that in a few months.
Yeah, that's live and available for pre-order. After that, February 11th, we've got a Webflow Work Jam coming up. This is an official Webflow meetup event. We're going to just hang out. We'll have music in the background. We'll have some people from the Webflow community hanging out. We'll work. I don't know. We're going to experiment with like a virtual co-working space. So that's what this is. We'll add the link to that in the description. We've also got, Joe, do you want to talk about this iCal update? This thing is ready and live and ready to rock. So what are we looking at here? This is the Finsweet Effin' Growth page, but what's going on with these buttons, links, things here?
So we have a Google Calendar, Apple Calendar, and Outlook invite system, and we're calling it Cal Invite for Webflow. It's going to let you put calendar invite system on your Webflow site with a library that we created at Finsweet. Just recorded the videos for that this weekend. That is going to be launching in a couple weeks, and you'll be able to do what you're looking at right now. Go put that invite system right on your site.
Boom. And then the last thing, what was the last thing we were talking about here? We got some notes for the
Airtable. Airtable app. That's a nice one. We've been working on an Airtable app that will connect Airtable to Webflow CMS. That is going to be submitted to Airtable today for review. So we should be launching that real soon. We're going to get that in your hands, get you connecting Webflow CMS to Airtable. That's going to be powerful for you Airtable users.
All right, perfect. Well, that's it. That's the updates. That's all the updates we got. We're going to just take a couple minutes at the beginning of these shows to do a little bit of that, a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. The last thing, hey, if you want to share this video with a friend, we're trying to get, let's see, we got 40 concurrent viewers right now. We've got another, let's see, how many on Facebook here? Another 5. So if we get to 100 people today, we had 71 last week. If we get to 100 people today, we're going to give away a little bit of consulting time, some t-shirts from that Finsweet store. And so anyway, before we do too much of that, go ahead and share, subscribe. We're going to be here every Tuesday at 12 Eastern time doing this show. So let's get right into it, Joe. What are we talking about when we mean technical? What does it mean to get technical inside of Webflow? Why is that different than other platforms? This is what we're talking about in this first segment. What do you mean by getting technical in Webflow?
When I think of technical in Webflow, I'm thinking of understanding how Webflow works and understanding the pieces that come together that go and display your web page. This is really important. It's not a needed skill or a required skill for Webflow, but when you have that skill, you are going to be able to take your knowledge, your professional career, your skill in Webflow to the next level. Being able to understand these things is really important. And I'll tell you what it's not. We are not talking about being a developer, a JavaScript developer. This is not about writing code. This is not about understanding servers. I consider myself technical in Webflow, and I do not write code. So that's not what this is about. We're not encouraging you to be a code writer. We are encouraging you to get technical, and that's what this episode's all about.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about what does the no-code movement entail? Like, what does that mean? You know, everybody here is kind of like, you know, using this term no code, but it's kind of a misnomer because there's a lot of code behind the scenes. It is very technical. And the more you can understand what's actually happening behind that, I was telling Joe before the stream that, like, I have learned more about code and how it works and the technical side of web development working with WordPress than I ever did in 7-8 years of working with WordPress. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to instill in everyone here, is that, like, there's a level that you can take up in your Webflow development once you start understanding some of that technical knowledge, some of those limitations. And we want to walk through that. How do you speak to developers? How do you understand some of the more technical sides of the things that you're doing inside of this Webflow build? And how does that all come together to grow your business? So, Joe, talk to me a little bit about what's going on right now. Why is this exploding? Why are so many people getting into the web design business? Why are they, like, what is this no code movement about? Why is Webflow so important in that movement? And then why are we kind of building this business around all of that?
Sure. Webflow is becoming very popular because it's so easy to use. And you don't have to use code, which is a big plus for a lot of people. And even as you become technical, it's not saying you should use code on your site, but knowing how to is important. When you're in something like a WordPress, it doesn't really require you to understand how it works. If you're using a template system, if you're using plugins, you can start putting your website together without really understanding it. When you are building a Webflow site and there is a feature that is not supported natively, which is very common, having that technical background is going to help you deliver that feature correctly. It's going to help you put that on the site correctly. And Webflow is now forcing us to learn that in the best way possible. They're forcing us by saying, hey, this is not native. You're going to have to do something a little extra to make this happen. Having that technical knowledge is going to help you choose the best way to go and implement what you need to implement.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing about Webflow and really important in the industry. And I think it's going to encourage a lot of people to get to this next level of knowledge. If you don't have a WordPress plugin on Webflow, go make it yourself. You can do that with Webflow.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit too about what differentiates like a WordPress or a Squarespace or a Wix even from a Webflow from a technical standpoint, right? A lot of people think, because WordPress, you can get very technical, right? You can get as deep as you want with WordPress. WordPress is kind of like the gorilla, the elephant in the room, if you will. You can do anything with WordPress, but there, like at some point, at most points, you have to like learn how to code, and you got to know PHP in addition to CSS, HTML, etc. So most people are using WordPress with just like a page builder or like some kind of theme builder or like a visual something, an Oxygen, Elementor, Divi, whatever framework they use. And same thing with like Squarespace, you're working always inside of a theme, whereas Webflow actually lets you manipulate the building blocks of the web, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript directly. And I think for me, that's what separates the technical side of things with Webflow. For like, I never had to know any of that with WordPress. Any thoughts on, you know, like, is WordPress no code technically? I know Webflow is specifically, but kind of because they've claimed the moniker, the no code moniker. Does that exclude something like a WordPress or Wix or Squarespace from being considered part of this no code movement?
Well, that's really a great point, in that Webflow is forcing us to be more technical. Like you said, understanding that CSS, understanding position, or understanding the difference between flex and grid and when to use each. Understanding these concepts is taking people's web design and development knowledge to the next level. And I don't think that WordPress platforms, Wix platforms, Squarespace platforms are making us do that. I like to look at the WordPress and the Wix and the Squarespace as true drag and drops. You have these elements, you're dragging them on the page, and it just happens automatically. I don't like to look at Webflow like that. When I'm building something in Webflow, I feel like I am actually constructing it based on my knowledge of how HTML and CSS work together. The more I understand that, the better my builds are going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree 100%.
And you can't...
Yeah,
no, keep going.
Grace is even saying here that she had a hard time in dev courses in university, and that she's learned more about code using no-code tools than she did in some dev courses. I can't tell you how many like boot camps, code boot camps, or programs like apps or workshops or courses that I tried, and I never understood how to write it all semantically. It all seemed like Greek to me. But here you give it to me in a visual interface like Webflow does, and you just allow me to use these styles and like something I'm more familiar with, and now I can write it fluently, you know? And so I think this is such a change, and this is what's happening in this movement, and this is why there's a differentiation from the stuff that you're seeing in WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, etc., and why you're seeing a lot of those people come to Webflow, why you're even seeing front-end developers who know how to write code come into tools like Webflow, etc., because it becomes just more natural for them to do things. I mean, if you think about a front-end developer having to write a specification for a grid, a 5-column grid or something, and having to remember grid column 3 space whatever, manage your gutters, and what? It's confusing as hell. Or you could use this little tool that Webflow made that allows you to build these grids and use those natively. And I think that becomes just so valuable that regardless of what your background is from a tech standpoint, you're seeing more and more developers come into these tools because it just makes the job easier. You don't see a single architect anymore drafting by hand. They're all using AutoCAD, right? Even if they loved drafting by hand and that was the way architecture worked for a long time, this tool came, and think about how many more architects there are because of these digital tools, because they can draft and the changes that they can make. And I think that's the same thing that's kind of happening in this industry. Anyway, thoughts there before we jump into the next phase of this, Joe?
No, let's jump in. Let's talk about how to speak to developers.
Yeah.
This is really important. And remember to what I said in the beginning, you do not need to know how to write code to use Webflow. You need to know how to speak to developers to build advanced Webflow sites. This I see as a very important skill in your Webflow career. Maybe you're building sites right now and they're great and they're working and they don't need code. They don't need a developer. That's fine. If you want to continue growing, you're going to have more challenging sites. You're going to have more challenging features and functionalities, and you'll get to a point where you can't implement those yourself. That's fine. You need to be able to talk to a developer and tell them, hey, this is what we're trying to do in Webflow. This is what we have available to us. These are the limitations. Can you please do this? Being able to do that is going to let you grow and grow and grow in the type of projects that you can take on.
Yeah.
When you are doing $50,000 projects, it's probably going to require some JavaScript developer. They're going to have some requirement that needs a developer that writes code. So we're going to talk more about speaking to developers than becoming a developer.
Yeah. Yeah, communicating with a developer. I mean, the biggest problem in the entire development cycle is dealing with the communication layer between designers and the developers. This has always been the problem. Talk to any dev shop. The problem always comes from typically your creative or your product, whoever's the product owner, the manager, and has the idea for this product. They, in their head, they have all this dream of what this product should be, right? But then a developer has no clue. And so somehow, you know, you got to extract what's inside of your head out into a format that the developer can use. And that requires like specific gathering for requirements. That requires lining out the information in a way that other people can understand. And so, Joe, talk to me a little bit about how do you digest this information when you deal with a client, when a client comes to us and they say, hey, we have this idea for a big project. It's going to have X, Y, and Z. How do you start ingesting that information in a way that allows you to then communicate that to the devs or figure out, okay, this we can do natively in Webflow. This is going to require a little bit of custom development. Let's talk a little bit through about how we ingest that information and what are you going through as this happens in real time?
My technical knowledge is all about understanding the limitations and what's possible, whether that's Webflow, whether that's JavaScript, whether that's CSS, HTML. You have to understand what's possible and what's not possible. So when someone's on the phone and says, hey, we need this, 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 and this, I may not be able to explain exactly how we do it, but I can say, yes, it's possible. No, it's not possible. And I can probably give some really good tips on how we can go and solve that problem. So, hey, this is not possible in Webflow, but we can do this, which will give you the same end result. Or if you prefer this way, we could do this, this, and this. So I'm not explaining, hey, we have to put custom code in here and we're going to write a function that does this. And that doesn't matter. Clients don't want to hear that. They want to hear, yes, it's possible. No, it's not possible. These are my options. This is how I can get the same end result. So that's really what I've been focusing on the past few years. And understanding that has been invaluable. It's amazing how you can change somebody's opinion on the phone by solving their problem in real time. Really amazing.
And some of that comes from experience. We talk a little bit about that in the last episode about knowing the platform, being thorough. We're going to talk in the next segment a little bit about the limitations specifically inside of Webflow and how to overcome those. But I want to get a little bit more specific here, Joe, if we can, for the viewer. Because at one point you didn't have that broad a depth of knowledge of Webflow. So at one point you weren't able to have as seamless a conversation with devs and with other people building these projects. What helped make that transition? Was there like something that popped in your head that you were finally like, aha, I can do this? Talk to me about those early days when you first found your first couple devs and you started having these conversations. Like, where were the pitfalls and how did you succeed through them?
Sure, absolutely. This is something I'm going to recommend everybody to do. This is exactly how I did it. I was motivated pretty early on to understand JavaScript, and I said, I'm going to be a JavaScript developer. I'm going to write this code, and I did the boot camps. I did the docs reviews and trying to learn this stuff, and it never stuck. It was always confusing, even the easy stuff. So I got to a point where I said, hey, it's pretty obvious that I shouldn't be a JavaScript developer, but I know it's very important for me to understand this. So what do? I go and find a professional, a JavaScript developer, somebody who just writes JavaScript. They didn't know Webflow. They didn't know any platform specifically. They're just a vanilla JavaScript developer. Teamed up with that person, and that person essentially taught me by writing the scripts that I needed for client sites. So a client said, hey, I need this and this to happen. I would try to explain that to the JavaScript developer. The JavaScript developer would send a script back, and instead of just copy pasting and being done, I asked the JavaScript developer how it worked. Why did you do it like this? How did you do it like this? And for the next script, can you put in comments in the code so I can understand it? And I would ask and ask and ask and just get as much knowledge from this professional as possible.
Yeah.
And over time, after a year or two, I felt pretty comfortable talking to him and actually explaining the logic and how the JavaScript should work before even presenting the problem.
Yeah.
So I would actually figure out how to do it. He would just go and write the code. And we still do that today. This person is still in the Finsweet team 4 years later. I say, hey, this is what we need. You can do this, 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 and this. Writes the code, and we're good.
Yeah.
So this process worked in the beginning. It works now. And this is how I learned the core basics of JavaScript.
And I think it's important for people to understand that sometimes it's going to take a good amount of time. You said after a year or two, right? So some people might think like, oh, I'm going to learn this in a week, or I'm going to go in my first project ever, I'm going to bang this out of the park and it's going to be perfect. Odds are that's not going to happen like that, right? Odds are it's going to take some time of working through this. It's going to take some messing up a little bit. It's going to take some revisions. And then you can figure out, okay, how do we find efficiencies here? How do we like do this better next time? And as you kind of do some of that, you'll hopefully be learning more, just like you might dissect a Webflow clonable and understand how somebody built an interaction or how they did a specific layout. You start working with more technical minded people. You start working on more complex projects. And through that process, you start to understand, okay, how do I digest this information in a way that makes sense to this person? Kyle in the comments here is talking about explaining classes to designers and getting them to start naming accurately when building in Figma and in other software, etc. So that again goes to another way that you can add some technical knowledge as a designer, right? If you're a designer and you're just used to working inside of Figma or Sketch or Photoshop or whatever it is that you're doing your work in, and you don't really understand the principles of how web design works, you might design things that are a little more complicated to build without understanding how much you're adding on to the dev team, right? And so as a developer or as a designer, if you start understanding how to name classes, how to lay out structure, how to kind of organize some of these things, you make that process work more seamless. And so this is another way that understanding a little bit of the technical side of thing doesn't mean you have to become a developer, but it just makes the workflow more efficient inside of a dev and build process. We had in our notes here to talk a little bit too about HTML, CSS, and positioning, because that's one of the differentiators. That's the main differentiator with Webflow versus some of the other platforms. Is again, in WordPress, you're working inside of a theme. You almost never run into Flex when you're working inside of WordPress. You never run into those options, right? You just add a gallery, and then that's how you lay out your images in a row or a column or whatever the theme has as a tool. And so, like, again, learning HTML, CSS, even just a little bit of this JavaScript. Joe, can you talk to us about like when Finsweet was kind of coming up, or when Finsweet, like when you were started kind of getting a groove on this stuff? How did that change as an agency, the type of projects you could bring in? How did you make that known to customers that you had now had this technical skill set, right? How did you start telling people? How did people know that you were doing other things with technical work in your projects?
Well, it happened very naturally in that as the projects got bigger, they were asking for these things. And before I knew anything, I'd have to say, I don't know the answer to that. Let me check with one of our developers and I'll get back to you. That's okay to say. And that's what I was saying a lot of the time. Let me check and let me get back to you. And then I'd get back with a full explanation on how we can do it. And we talked about this in previous episodes. As you get bigger and bigger clients come. So it was a very natural process, and the technical side was not advertised. We never said, hey, we have technical experience, we can write JavaScript. We still don't even do that. Yeah. We are just getting bigger projects, and bigger projects naturally need more technical sense. Yeah. And I want to comment on something you said earlier about the patience. The patience is key. It's not going to come right away. It's going to be confusing. You will be frustrated. And it happens with any new thing that you learn. Even HTML and CSS. Nobody picks up Webflow for the first time and is just magically using the designer and everything is perfect. 6 months maybe it took me to be, hey, I feel good with HTML and CSS now. 6 months of continuous working, of really frustrating, why is this position absolute not working? These kind of things you have to work through, and it may take 5 weeks for you. It may take 5 years, but if you're serious about growing, you do need the skill.
Yeah. I remember when I first started in Webflow, how many times I would start a project and then I'd screw it up so bad that I'd just get frustrated and walk away. And I'm just like, I have no clue. And it really didn't start clicking until I watched other people kind of building. And I was like, oh, now I see. And that helped me again understand. And once it clicked, it was like off to the races. So yeah, I agree. Learning and taking the time to figure all that stuff out is the way. Junio Caesar, he's asking, do you think that in order to level up in the Webflow, does he need to learn JavaScript? It does help, obviously, having some JavaScript knowledge. Joe, do you want to speak to some of that? I don't think it's a requirement, but it couldn't hurt. So do you want to talk a little bit about, just as we're here in the How to Speak developer, is it a requirement for you to learn some JavaScript?
No, it's not a requirement. And I'll put this in context that I do not know how to code. Yet I see my technical knowledge as one of the reasons Finsweet is so successful right now. So you don't have to code. And I'm not interested in learning how to code. I honestly cannot write one line of JavaScript that is just me typing and writing JavaScript, because I don't care about that. I only care about communicating JavaScript and understanding JavaScript. So is it a requirement for you to know how to code? No. Is it a requirement for you to know about JavaScript? No, it's not a requirement. You can have a 15-year career in Webflow and not write a single line of code. But if you want to get to the next level and the next level and the next level, you do.
Yeah. And not only that, but then at some point, you're probably going to want to start hiring somebody that has those skills that you don't to grow on the team. You can check out episode 1 about how to hire and plan for growth. But let's go into the next step, because that's the perfect step into knowing your limitations. Because if you don't know JavaScript, that's obviously a limitation in your skill set. And so last week we talked about knowing the limitations of the platform, etc. This week we've got a link, knowing the limitations of Webflow as a very specific set of rules that you can work inside of is important to kind of knowing what you can build and where you can operate. And so like the biggest issue I had at the beginning was knowing, yes, you can, no, you can't, certain things you think you can just do and you find out that you can't, and you're like, I mean, even simple things like assigning multiple recipients for an email form, you know, is something that I took for granted coming from WordPress, and you come into Webflow and you realize, okay, there's a master email in here that I can send an email to on a form submission. Otherwise, I got to hook up a Zapier and set up an email trigger somewhere else or something like that. And so let's, I can pull up. Did you give any thought to this list that I shared ahead of time? Let's see, the CMS, because there's a big list on the forum. Let me go to this real quick. Let's pull us. There's a big list on the forum. If anybody hasn't seen this, we can share this in the comments. So I'm going to go ahead and share this in the comments and come back to the list so anybody can see that. But this is a real thorough list of all of the Webflow limitations outlined, and this gets updated pretty regularly whenever anybody discovers a new limitation. I remember I found this within my first couple weeks of working with Webflow. I found this list, and it's one of those things that I always kind of come back to understand specifically. And then every once in a while you see something gets like, you know, lined out because they overcome that as a limitation. So talk to me, Joe, what do you see when you see this list, when you think about this? What's going through your head as you start thinking about some of these limitations on the platform?
I see the limitation list as an opportunity to create new solutions. Webflow has these limitations in place. There's no way around them. Instead of crying about them, let's go and create real solutions that can create a similar outcome, or maybe the same exact outcome. When you are talking to a client or a JavaScript developer or someone on your team, you need to know what Webflow can do and what Webflow can't do. If you don't explain that correctly, you run the risk of somebody thinking they can do something in Webflow that can't be done. If you're speaking to a JavaScript developer and you don't tell them about the limitations within what they're trying to write, they may not write it correctly. And they may say, hey, can we put the dynamic item here? Or can we do this and this and this? And the answer is no to that. You have to be able to communicate that. When you're on a sales call with a client and they say, I want to do this in Webflow, you need to be able to call out that limitation and say, we can't do this, but we can do this, this, and this. Yeah. Instead of just saying no, you give them real solutions to follow up on, and that is going to win you that sale. Because when everybody else is saying no, they're speaking to 5 people and everybody says no, 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 and you're the only person that says yes, what do you think that client's going to do? You think they're going to go with the 4 people that said no, or are they going to go with you that have a solution?
Yeah. And this is where the CMS docs come from. This is where the CMS library comes from. This is where all of our Webflow hacks and different code crumb tools and all the stuff that we have out there that are like answers to all these problems is basically the last, 3-4 years of Joe's life figuring out how to solve all these problems in Webflow, selling a website, having to figure out how to solve a technical hurdle, and then creating a tool around that. Which then leads us to some of the bigger projects that we're working on, which is like the Noble CMS, which we tease as our press conference. That is something that we're looking forward to releasing soon. The Airtable connection, we had some comments in here. People are looking forward to that. You see a lot of people exploring and playing with Airtable as a database, using all these connection tools to connect their Webflow site to this, that, and the other. what do you see? Like, let's just go off script here a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what you see evolving in this space. Um, my biggest concern, or the biggest thing that I beat my head into all the time, is when I do talk to somebody who has a technical background, they kind of dismiss the whole no code movement. They dismiss a Webflow developer. They dismiss this whole thing as trivial because it's not as technical as what they can comprehend in their head. So they're the computer science major. They're like, I can do everything with code. And so they see us and they maybe dismiss us as non-technical or as trivial. And that really frustrates me. How do you deal with that? How do you do you come across that in your conversations with developers? Is that something that bothers you, that you think about?
Well, the longer that these developers are doing that, the better off we are. So part of me actually likes that. When I hear developers complain about no code, it's just giving us more opportunity to grow in this space before they jump into it. Everyone's starting to come into Webflow. We're seeing bigger companies migrate to Webflow. We're seeing public companies take their entire website infrastructure to Webflow. All these people are going to learn Webflow. And the developers, once those developers start really taking control of Webflow, we're going to see more products. We're going to see more solutions. We're going to see more things that will come over these limitations, that will make these limitations go away. So I think the space is really prime for us non-technical people, for us non-developers to start learning this, to start understanding this, so that when the developers come in, our Webflow knowledge is so deep that it could be even more powerful than the power to write JavaScript.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing, right? I talked about this a little bit, and I probably did a bad job talking about the architecture example, but like, think about video production. I do a lot of video production, and for a long time, video production meant spinning the reel, getting the 35 millimeter tape, and if I wanted to make a cut or an edit, I had to slice the tape and then tape it back together, and like very specific set of tools and skills that I had to have, and like resources. And then digital film came out, and everybody makes a video. Like, everybody's got one of these things that they can just make a video and do editing, and it's crazy the amount of video content. It's hundreds of thousands of hours of video, like daily, uploaded onto YouTube, and then that doesn't even take into account all the other platforms. And so again, these fundamental shifts of abstraction have happened in almost every industry. They've happened in architecture, it's happened in 3D design, it's happened in video graphics, it's happened in engineering, in lots of spaces, but it has not happened in this technical space. And what we're seeing right now is that begin to take place. And so I agree. I think we're at the beginning of it, and some of their criticisms from a developer that it's trivial is probably well suited in certain places, because you see a lot of people running around thinking that they know a little bit of no code and now they're some master technical person. And that does the whole movement a little bit of a disservice. But when you do start to see what people are building, when you start to see the potential for some of this stuff to be built, when you start to see that it now makes sense to build a piece of software for 1,000 people, for a couple hundred users, that was never possible, right? If you were building software, you had to have millions of users in order to make it viable. Now you're getting to the place where small communities can build their own software, and it makes sense to manage and pay for that for only a couple hundred users. So what that's going to do for community, what that's going to do for businesses, for small networks, it's I don't even think we can understand. And that doesn't even, again, take into account the more complexity that's going to be added as this evolves, as these platforms grow, as you're able to build logic inside of Webflow, as you're able to do more things with integrations, etc. So kind of covered a lot there. Any thoughts directly to, that little rant there?
No, that's that's a good overview. And let me make a comment on also learning no-code tools in a positive sense, that when you know technical, you can pick up no-code tools faster. I'll give you an example of Zapier. Last year, I had never touched Zapier before. We never had to use it. I jumped into Zapier for the first time, and I felt like a master after a few days because of my technical knowledge. Understanding how variables work, understanding how the flow of data can go between platforms with the idea of variables is incredibly important. So instead of just looking at it as a front-end tool that I'm dragging and dropping different pieces of text and different elements. I'm actually looking at it as a technical platform. That's how I look at Airtable. That's how I look at Webflow.
Yeah.
So with this knowledge, you can really pick up the no-code tools much faster and do faster things. The technical knowledge is going to help you understand it faster and do it right.
Yeah. I think that's kind of how I define what a no-code app is versus not no-code. Is, am I actually abstracting the concepts of the direct thing that I'm representing? So again, with Webflow, I'm abstracting HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript. I'm working directly with those objects, right? I'm not clicking a button that then creates my rows and columns for me. That's more WordPress, Squarespace kind of thing. Same thing with what you're talking about, Zapier, handling data, Integromat, you know, using some of these tools to handle and modulate data. Again, you're working with the actual data. You have to understand the flow, the work processes, binding the data, combining, doing whatever, you know, like, and so again, the more technical you can add to that, the more understanding you have of what these things are actually doing, the better you can then use these no-code tools to accomplish your goals, which is a great transition to thinking on the fly, I do believe. Penny says used to spend hours editing audio tape in a previous life. Penny, yeah, I would love to hear some of those stories. And then Kyle saying here, when agencies wake up to the fact that Webflow makes their operation more efficient and reduced overhead, yeah, that it's gonna explode. I agree. I think that we're just really at the beginning of this Webflow explosion slash front end as a service is kind of what I'm calling this. Right, I think we're going to see a whole new industry. The last few years have been about software as a service, taking over, using these tools to kind of outsource your back end, your office management, your business management. Now we're going to see all that data kind of be connected to front ends as a service, which allow you to take all that data you've been collecting and modulate it in a visual interface. This is the closest thing that I can see Webflow doing, and I could see that evolving specifically as we go, which means there's going to be lots of opportunities to think on the fly, to solve problems, to come up with solutions that people entering this technical space will inevitably have. So how do people take advantage of this, Joe? How do they ride this wave? How do they use that creative problem solving to take advantage of some of this by being able to, you know, provide solutions on the fly?
Well, I think it speeds up workflow. That's something that I saw right away when bringing on our JavaScript developer. How many times have you been looking for a solution in Webflow and you're through the forums and you're through Google searches and you're trying to find if someone else did it in a certain way that you have in your mind and you can't find it? You're there for hours, you're looking. If you know a little bit of JavaScript, you have that JavaScript developer, you could say, hey, we're trying to do this. Let's try this and this. You can have that same end result in 30 minutes versus the 5 hours of looking, and the solution may not even be ready in 5 hours. So right away, when you start solving problems like this, it can increase your speed a lot and your efficiency and even your website performance. I've seen a lot of implementations bringing in a lot of random components, a lot of random things to make something work with no code, when really just 2 or 3 lines of JavaScript can achieve the same thing. So speed increase, that's great. And now that's part of our workflow at Finsweet. Everybody, all the designers, if they have a technical issue, they're not spending hours looking for it on the forum. They're talking to one of our JavaScript developers and figuring out how to do it the way the client wants.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. And we're seeing our team learning. Raimar, you see this happening. Our team is learning this stuff so well. There are people that started just last year that had no knowledge. And now they're opening up Inspector. They're coming up with solutions. They're writing their own JavaScript. It's amazing. And we're seeing people get better and better and better and take on bigger and bigger and bigger projects.
Yeah, and the thing we're trying to do too with all of that is figure out how do you then turn that into a library that we can use internally that becomes, you know, so when we create a problem, you know, a month from now, when we need to recreate that same solution, we don't have to go reinvent the wheel. We just grab it off the shelf. And so creating an archive, a library. And again, this is what led to some of these CMS docs, CMS libraries and tools that we released to the community. You can expect us to continue to grow as we figure out some of these solutions. We'll keep packaging that stuff up and offering it out. We're exploring with different ways to add value to the community inside of some of that. And we'll be asking you as a community, you know, what would you like to see from us? Maybe this is, we can start prompting for the Q&A. Are there tools that you would like to see? Are there things that you have problems technical in Webflow right now that you're having a hard time solving? Let's go ahead and start queuing up some Q&A for the rest of the session here, because we want to dive deep into like any specific problems you all may have. The next little segment here, we're going to talk about where you can find solutions. Specifically, we've got some places to look. Joe will kind of walk you through some of the places he finds solutions. But if you've got any specific questions that as it relates to solving a technical problem, overcoming a technical hurdle, or kind of taking that next step in your path, now's the time. Go ahead and leave those in the comments. We'll address that here in a second. Joe, do you want to talk a little bit about where people can find solutions, starting with the Suite.js and then moving on from there as these as we try to corral some of these questions?
Sure. And before I talk solutions, I want to talk about first steps to get to the solutions. How am I going to start to understand this so I know what solutions I need? If you're starting out from zero, you may not even know what solution you're looking for. Maybe you're interested in being a website developer, but you don't know what to do. So you are working on a site and the client asks for something that you don't know how to do. Have that JavaScript developer on the side, go to, okay, I lost my train of thought there. Live show
So you've got
breakdown.
the JavaScript
I completely
developer.
forgot what I was going to say.
You're talking about finding solutions in the JavaScript. So you're talking about taking the JavaScript developer and trying to figure out something specific to a certain problem.
Yeah. So we're trying to help all of you become more technical. One of those things we're doing is Suite.js. Suite.js is going to give you JavaScript developers to solve your problems with our products, with our libraries, with our code solutions. Go onto that channel and start talking to our developers. We have JavaScript developers who are helping you. When they answer something for you, ask how it worked or ask for comments in the code. We'll do that. And as you keep doing this, as you have trouble with the first one, the second one, the fifth one, the 10th one, after the 20th time, maybe you start to get it. After the 30th time, you start to understand it a little bit more. After 100 JavaScript solutions, now you say, okay, maybe I could start figuring this out myself. So you have to practice. We have that practice channel starting out with Suite.js. And that's a great first step to look.
Yeah.
Also implementing like third-party libraries. Maybe what we have at Finsweet is not what you need. You need something that requires some third-party JavaScript. Try it out. Try out this library and that library. You can spend a few hours playing around with it and trying to understand how the JavaScript works. That's a really, really good learning tool.
Yeah.
Sometimes it will work. Sometimes it won't. You're going to be frustrated. You got to keep testing. Got to keep trying.
Yep. Yeah, and just staying active.
And clonables.
In the community. Yeah, I was gonna say clonables. Staying active in the community, right? Like, who's this guy? Timothy Ricks has been killing it. If you're not part of the Facebook group or if you haven't seen this guy's videos, he's created some real valuable clonables real recently, gaining a lot of traction. People are just doing this to stand out. We talked about how do you sell yourself? How do you increase value and leads? There's lots of people who are doing these, creating these kind of resources. It's not just us out here in the Webflow community building beautiful resources for people. And this is how they're standing out. This is how they provide value back to the community. And so the more you get involved, the more you get active in the community, the more you run into these people who are doing these things. And then like, so in my Webflow, if you go into my dashboard, I have a components folder, right? So every time somebody creates a little clonable with one of these solutions or one of these little hacks, I go and I clone it. I put it in my little sandbox. So this way, when I like need this thing later on down the road, I don't have to go hunting for it all over the web. I've got my own little library of resources that people have solved for some of these problems along the way. And so like really just kind of keeping your eyes open in the periphery of the community and seeing where other people are creating, you know, obviously Finsweet's a resource, the Pixel Geek, you know, the Connor Finlayson, who's all these people that are just out there creating, Aaron Kornblit, who's creating like beautiful videos for how to do some of these things. it's amazing. Like that's one of the things that I love about this no code space is that everyone's just kind of giving away their knowledge base. Some people are charging, there's places where you can monetize it and you're going to run into a gate where once in a while you got to pay somebody. But the amount of free content, the amount of free learning that's available in this community continues to blow me away all the time. Led by,
And you can follow those people. Go ahead, check out the videos of those people. It doesn't need to be a formal course. You could just start reviewing these videos, start reviewing these clonables line by line. I know Aaron with Automate All the Things, he has several technical videos where he's also learning his new code stuff. This is really powerful. Go and watch that. It's going to be confusing as hell the first time. Our stuff may be confusing as hell the first time, but after a while, it's not going to be confusing. And that's when you start feeling that you get to the next level.
Well, and we talked about this, like, just like it might take you a couple years to figure some of this stuff out, it might take you a couple times of watching the video to actually understand what's going on. You may need to watch it once just to understand the high level concept and like see the flow. And then you might need to watch it again while you're building. And then you might need to pause it and like go back and implement and try and test and iterate and just kind of seeing some of these things. And then, like that's really, there's no shortcut. Because we're in such a binary industry, and we talked about this last time, tech is beautiful because if I send you to a product page, either the product works or it doesn't, right? There's no BS in this business. And so in order to create that threshold, the only way to get into that is to do the work, right? There's no way to BS your way into understanding things more technically. It's just, you're not gonna do it. You can BS design, you can BS certain things, you can BS in sales. There's lots of places where you can like, just a quick talking, slick moving person can make moves. But when you're talking about on a technical side of things, either you deliver or you don't. And the only way to gain that knowledge is to put in the work, is to, have the experience. So any thoughts there before we start scrubbing through some questions here?
I'm ready for the questions, and I love the last thing you just said. It either works or it doesn't. If a client wants a feature, you're either going to deliver that feature or you're not going to deliver that feature. And having that technical knowledge helps you understand if you will or you won't.
Bailey in the house, I see you. Bailey Cimarel just joined us, so this is a Webflow, legend. We got the OGs in the house, y'all. Kyle, let's see, Wizardry Method. Okay, so lots of people are talking about Timothy Ricks. Yeah, he's been kind of killing it. If you're in that Facebook group, if you're not in the Facebook group, listen, I only use Facebook for the Webflow Facebook group. The activity in there, the camaraderie in there, like that's a great place to go if you're not. Twitter also, no code Twitter is out of control. If you're not active on no code Twitter, you just start exploring some of that. Let's see, Grace, hi Grace. Let's see, Alexandra, Renee. I'm not even gonna try your last name, Poestra. Flipping loves clonables. Me too. That's how I learned. Like I think clonables and copy and paste inside of Webflow is like the most underrated feature. Like the rest of the stuff is just so good. And then, oh, by the way, you can copy and paste between projects or just transfer a site or whatever, like just grab this element from another site. And yeah, that's how I learned Webflow, was dissecting all those. And it's really how I kind of climbed into the business, was creating those clonables and giving that stuff away. That's how I've connected with most of the people in the community and kind of built my presence in the space. So any thoughts about any of that, Joe?
Yeah, same here. The first 6 months of becoming technical in HTML and CSS, it was all clonables, seeing how other people did it. Keep doing that. You don't have to stop doing that.
Yeah.
No matter how good you are, there's always going to be a clonable that does something that you don't know how to do. You can go do that, clone it, figure it out, and now you have a new skill.
Yeah. Nina, glad to help. She said that she had not seen that list of limitations in Webflow, that she's been working with Webflow for 2 years and hadn't seen that. So glad to provide some value there. Scott Humphrey, nice. I love how much I can relate to your flow and way of thinking with my journey so far into the low-code world. Great show, as always. Thanks for being here, Scott. Scott's been around for the last couple of weeks, so we appreciate you hanging with us. There's a few people in here that, Kyle and Grace and Rohan, and there's a number of people that have been hanging with us. Rohan gets a little bit of credit, even though he's on the team, but, he's still got to sit around and listen to the thing, so gotta try to keep Rohan interested, We got to have Rohan
Do
on
we
the
have
show
any
one time.
questions?
That's what I'm looking through here. Let's see. As a non-tech person, what do you look for in a JS developer? Specific skills, framework, jQuery? That's a good question, Joe. I'll let you handle that one.
Yeah, I think it's important that you find a JavaScript developer that knows vanilla JavaScript, which is just plain JavaScript. If somebody only knows jQuery, that's kind of a red flag. That's not somebody you want to hire to do work for you. They should have a good understanding of JavaScript, and you can always start small. This is the easiest test project you can possibly give. With designers, with Webflow development, you can't just say, hey, design this nav or design this section. With a JavaScript developer, you could say, make a script that does this and this. And it may take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and that's a very short and easy test. So what you can do is maybe find a solution online, find something online that you see working. Send a separate message to this JavaScript developer and say, hey, I'm trying to do this, this, and this. See if they can make it work. See how their code relates to the code that is actually working. And that's a good place to start. Start small. If they keep delivering and it keeps working, keep working with them. If they don't, if they keep having issue after issue, that's not the right person to work with.
Yeah.
So trial and error. That's how we did it. And there were a lot of failures at Finsweet. It wasn't just we found Yese, our JavaScript developer, and that's it. It was failure, failure, Yese, failure, Yese.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah, it's a trial and error.
Great. Pablo Cortez is asking, how can we optimize Webflow interactions? Says they work great, but they play the site speed performance, cleaner to animate with custom code instead, etc. Lottie files is a great way to do that. But what do you think, Joe? How's the best way to optimize interactions?
Well, if you're building a highly, highly interactive site, you may not want to use Webflow interactions. We're rebuilding Finsweet.com right now. This is the first time I'm publicly saying this. Finsweet.com is in an awesome, awesome rebrand. We are going to take every single thing about Finsweet to the next level.
It looks so sick.
It's so intense.
I saw a sneak peek. It looks ridiculous. Okay, just had to throw that in there.
It's so intense that we actually can't use Webflow interactions. We use Webflow interactions for every single client project. Every single thing that we do is Webflow interactions. But for this one, we can't use it. So we're actually using other JavaScript libraries to make it happen. And we actually have to go find somebody else outside of Finsweet to go and help us build this. And the reason is because everybody in Webflow knows Webflow interactions. Everybody on our team knows Webflow interactions. So if you're taking it to the next level, you may have to go to another JavaScript library to make that happen. But if you can keep your site within Webflow's interactions, I do recommend that. Going outside of the interactions now makes it a very big project and a very, very technical project.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I mean, it just depends on what you're trying to get, what you're trying to accomplish, what your budget is, what the constraints of your team are, you know, like an agency our size to be able to, you know, part this out and go a little extreme on pages or animations, etc., to get to the next level makes sense. If you're a one-person shop, maybe not. So again, understanding the context. Anthony, I don't think we're going to answer any Noble CMS. He's asking about unlisted, just stuff about technical questions about Noble CMS. I think we'll leave that for a future episode specifically about Noble. Tori, really love that you guys are doing this series. Amazing resource. Sick getting the chance to ask questions. Great. Yeah, we're glad that you're here. Let's see. As a non-technical person, okay, we got that one. Let's see. Are you familiar with GSAP, Green Sock Animation Platform? I think if so,
Yes.
How does it compare to Webflow animations? Do you know anything about that?
Performance-wise, significantly better than Webflow interactions. You are going to have to write code for it, and you don't get the visual interface that you get with Webflow. So if you're comfortable using it, go for it. If you don't need it, don't use it. If you have a few animations on your page, you have some scrolling effects, you have some cool things going on, you do not need to use third-party libraries. Even our Weglot page, our Weglot clonable famous promo, that is very interactive. It's very, very movement heavy. It's using Webflow interactions and just a few lines of JavaScript to take it to the next level, but it's not using a third-party JavaScript library. So only use that if you absolutely need it.
Yeah. Agreed. Let's see. Junio Cesar would like us to talk a little bit about the future of Webflow. Do you dare, Joe? Do we take a minute and
The future
give some
of
thoughts on
Webflow.
that? Yeah. That's such a
Yeah,
broad thing, Junio.
that's a
We,
broad one.
yeah, and I
Yeah,
think
I'll try to answer it. Sure.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Joe and I always have these ethereal conversations about what's happening in the world of Webflow. And kind of some of those conversations led to us thinking we should have this show. And so maybe we should figure out how to have some of those more candid conversations that are less structured as part of this. Maybe as like an after, like a more interactive fireside chat kind of thing. That might be interesting. So, yeah, but go ahead. Future Webflow, Joe, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm not going to comment on any potential future releases from Webflow. I'm not going to comment in a sense of they're going to have logic apps or they're going to have a marketplace, because who knows when that will happen, if ever. I'll just comment on it from a business perspective. How is it going to change business in its current form and its future form? Let's do that.
Sure.
So I think that big companies are going to start adopting Webflow, and their entire marketing team is going to be onboarded to the Webflow platform. What does this mean? This means we're going to see more landing pages. We're going to see more powerful marketing. We're going to see better advertisements. The web's going to become more beautiful. This is really powerful when you're talking about big companies. We're building some sites for enterprise level companies. There's going to be over 20 people onboarded to a single Webflow site. So now their whole marketing team has a powerful template builder. They're going to be able to create a webinar series without the need of creating a whole infrastructure to go build that on the web. They're going to be able to write blog posts faster. They're going to be able to do all of these things so much faster because of Webflow. So I think it's going to increase marketing in business. It's going to empower marketing in business, and we're going to see that working by being marketed to more.
Yeah.
Raimar, what do you think about that?
I'm going to go a little step further. I know you don't like to talk about what may or may not be coming from Webflow, and I don't want to talk about anything specifically, but I do want to talk about the philosophy that I know they're working towards, and that just comes from dissecting Vlad's brain every opportunity I get, watching the different streams he's been on and some one-on-one conversations with him. And their goals internally are to help people build software. So I think part of the goal is to get past the website thing and to get into, again, a little bit more of the software side of things. But we're seeing things like that in Bubble. We're seeing like Builder HQ. We're seeing like a Clutch Creator. There's all sorts of these tools that are kind of growing and bubbling up, no pun intended, in the no-code space. Webflow specifically has done the best job out of all of them at giving you a visual interface to abstract the core building blocks of the web, of the front end of the web, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which means if you can find a way to connect those things to any other existing data set, you've got, again, that's where that front end as a service that I was talking about before comes into play, where I think the opportunities for creative people and designers, marketing teams, to get in and finally be able to do things with all this data they've been collecting over the last few years. If you think about the last couple of years, everything's been about collect data as a business, content, conversions, sign up, this, that, the other. And so all these big businesses, companies, small, whatever, have just been collecting all this data, but they don't know what to do with it, right? You could maybe have a HubSpot who interprets some of that and gives you some actionable workflows or something. But HubSpot's expensive and it's cumbersome to install. And like, you still have to have technical knowledge in order to be able to organize the data inside of HubSpot and make it usable. And so what I see coming, Webflow, no code, etc., is more easy access to the underpinnings of technology that allow visual, creative, marketing people to take that data and produce meaningful experiences with that. I don't know what that means, right? Is that community driven? Are these dashboards? Are these micro apps? I don't know, right? But I do see lots more people building and interacting in a space where before that gate had always been the technical limitation. And so I think that's why, tying it back to this episode, the more you can do to see past the technical hurdle, right? Because right now, if you're looking like software is like, if you have a clear line of sight on a Vista, the technical hurdle is like a privacy fence that you can't see over. And so the more technical knowledge you get, it's just a step up. And so you can maybe see just past, the technical hurdle that other people might not be able to see. And it gives you infinitely more possibility in what you can do, what you can build. And so again, the more of those technical hurdles, and eventually the no code space is just going to build the bridge all the way up to that technical hurdle. And so there will be more technical hurdles behind it. There will be more fences, privacy fences behind it. But the idea of opening up what's behind that technical wall to more people kind of lies at the root of everything that's happening here. And I think that is what kind of excites me about the future of all this. Any other thoughts as a response to that, Joe?
Nice. No, great overview. Very different answers. Both,
Yeah.
I think, both accurate and correct and exciting.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more big picture ethereal. Joe's like, and this makes sense because I'm the marketer and communicator, whereas Joe's like CEO, actionable, what's happening right now. And so these 2 points bouncing off each other are good to have inside of a operation. So you get, a little bit of diversity of what's going on. So let's see. Couple more questions and then we'll bounce out here, and maybe you can leave in the comments thoughts. We're thinking about doing like a closed invite only, hands-on, like a more interactive thing, because this is cool. We can answer your questions in the comments, but it might be nice to have everybody kind of like hanging out in a space after these streams. So maybe just leave a thought in the comment if you think that's something that you'd be interested in. Let's see. Would love to see a Finsweet smooth scroll draggable slider, script, tutorial, paid course, etc. So that's just some thoughts. Maybe Rohan, if you want to write that down for the team. Let's see. Okay, do you think it's viable to make a web design business specifically focus on Webflow e-commerce, or are there too many limitations at the moment? We talked about that last week, about the e-commerce limitations. Do you want to jump into that, Joe, real quickly?
That could be dangerous right now. We don't know how quickly they're going to improve their e-commerce offering. Right now, I don't think it's a big enough industry to jump into and have full support for all the leads coming in. Maybe next year, yeah. What I recommend is focusing on e-commerce and focusing on other things. You can have an e-commerce side of your business without having it your only service. Yeah. So do both for now.
Yeah. I agree. Webflow, we mentioned this last week. Webflow e-commerce is for lower level simplified shops right now. Anything, you might want to go to Shopify or WooCommerce or something like that. Okay. Everything around no code is asking 10K CMS limit. Any possibility to overcome? Not natively in Webflow. We are working on a workaround inside of Noble CMS. Joe, do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, we have a solution. We should be releasing it within the next few months, and it will allow you to have over 10,000 items and then distribute that data across multiple websites.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting.
Quick comment on that. It's so interesting that we had such a different answer to the future of Webflow. I like to think of Finsweet as building some of these solutions that we're waiting for Webflow to go do. The 10,000 limit, it's not here, we're going to go build it. The filtering, it's not here, we're going to go build it. So we are going to bring marketing teams into this functionality. Marketing teams can now manage gigantic databases across multiple Webflow sites, which was previously not possible before Webflow. Yeah. So now empowering these marketing teams, not only with Webflow native features, but with tools that the community is making. Yep. Really powerful.
Exactly. I'm really looking forward to that Noble CMS stuff. Being able to display the same data set across multiple sites and kind of managing that in a single place seems exciting to me. So Grace is asking us, jumping back on the calendar announcement at the beginning, could the calendar invite be used in replace of Calendly? Grace, that calendar link is essentially like tied to the data of a CMS collection. So for instance, on the FN Growth podcast, it's attached to the date and time and everything that we kind of set up as fields in the back end of the collection. And so it creates the snippet to basically just create an iCal invite or a calendar invite that the system would read. It's not going to be for like picking a specific time or creating any kind of payment gateway or anything around that. So probably not an answer to replacing Calendly. Let's see. Any other thoughts there, Joe?
Yeah, no, it's not a Calendly replacement. We don't even have an option to send it to somebody. We could have done it, but we decided that that's not what this is for. This is for a reminder system, for putting something on your calendar so you remember to check up on it. It's really for that specific use case, not for scheduling two-way events.
Yeah. Here's a good question. Do we think that front-end devs moving to Webflow will put us designers doing Webflow at risk? Does it put us at risk or designers at risk?
No, I'm going to say no to that. And the reason is you have such an advantage being on the platform now that if somebody were to come to Webflow today, no matter how smart they are, I know I'm going to be better than them because I've been using it for 5 years. So if people are jumping onto the platform 2 years from now or today or tomorrow, if you've been using Webflow for some time, you have that advantage. So no, I wouldn't be worrying about anybody taking your position or your job. Also keep in mind that Webflow is growing. As more people come onto the platform, more people are also going to be using it to build their site. Yep. So we're hoping, and I think that we will have so many website projects inside Webflow that nobody's going to directly compete with each other. There's just going to be too much.
Well, and I agree, but just like think about WordPress now, right? There's lots of plugins, lots of different solutions. There's such a big ecosystem around WordPress. I think the same thing will kind of evolve around Webflow. And so there's so much market that, like, if you think about Webflow just celebrated 100,000 customers, WordPress is like 60 million websites. It's something silly, right? So like the scale there is just incomprehensible, like unless you see it visually. And so there's just so much potential inside of this, that what Joe's saying is right, that like there's room for everybody who's watching this right now to carve out a beautiful niche, and the people coming after to carve out their own space. And this is just going to be one of those things that continues to grow and grow. So yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about, they'll take some jobs, but more jobs are being created, and the better you are with the skill, the more available you are for work, the more opportunities you'll create for yourself. So yeah, I am not worried about that at all. So let's see, more companies, more requirements, more full-time. Okay, so do you think there will be highly paid full-time Webflow dev jobs in the future? There's highly paid Webflow dev jobs now, you know, like
absolutely. Yeah. As companies are coming over to the space, especially big companies, we're going to start seeing job offerings with Webflow as the lead skill. We see job offerings that say we are looking for a PHP developer or a Python developer. Soon, we're going to see more and more, we're looking for a Webflow developer. That's it. Don't care what else you know, we're looking for Webflow. So yes, absolutely, there's going to be more and more of these opportunities.
I mean, yeah, I already see a lot of that in job boards. You know, you're starting to see people who are looking, or even marketing requirements. I think just like HubSpot is kind of a requirement for marketers, or Google Analytics is required for marketers, soon Webflow will be an essential skill as for marketers and communicators and anybody who works in the digital world, just like WordPress is now, right? Like if you work in a marketing team, you better know how to log into WordPress and make a quick content update or update a blog or do some basic stuff. And so the same thing will happen here on the Webflow side of things, where more people will just kind of like keep sucking into this and filling up some of those roles. Let's see, private conversations, that would be awesome. Okay, so people are saying they'd like small group chats, so keep an eye for that. Actually, on the 11th, if you'd like to go, let me share this event invite in the chat, because we're doing something like this. We're doing a little work jam. So I'm going to share this right now in the chat. It's going to be like, we're playing with a virtual office space inside of gather.town, and we've had events here and there, events for our team, events externally, and we're kind of just deciding how do we want to do some of this stuff. So This would be a great place. If you're interested, February 11th, we're going to do kind of like a hangout and we'll test out some of that. So we'd love to see a few of you jump into that. That will be limited to 25 attendees. So just FYI, RSVP early for that. Let's see. Any other questions? Me, as a EU Webflow customer, I'm a bit confused about new privacy shield. Webflow is not responding directly about this matter. Any idea? So do we have any thoughts on privacy, GDPR, Webflow? What kind of restrictions might be there?
I know they have a lot to improve on. I cannot comment on it directly. We work with a lot of US companies and most of them do not say a single thing about it. So we don't have that much direct experience. I do know there's a lot of people talking about it. Check out the forums, check out what other people are saying. Yeah. And yeah, Webflow does have a lot of work to do, which I think they will do. I think they are working on this. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that comes down to one of those things of really understanding your user requirements and what they're doing on the website. That's probably a question for a lawyer or something if you have real concerns there. Let's see. Sorry, we couldn't get you to 100 viewers. We did get 228 total playbacks, 66 concurrent viewers. Last week was 71. The week before that was 41 or 49, I think, or whatever. So we're pacing pretty good. We're actually, internally, we're pretty happy with the turnout we're getting on these streams. Again, thanks to everybody who's hanging out with us. It's been a blast doing these, and we can't wait to kind of do more. You know, we've got a lot planned for this. We'd love to get show suggestions from you all. Thoughts about how we can make it better. Again, we'll work on some of the small group stuff, and we're trying to think about the community offering as a whole. What can we do to bring the more people into this inner circle and to kind of get you know, some ancillary activity outside of just the core Webflow community? How do we really appeal to the effing fans, you know, the people who make our ecosystem run more effectively, and then how can we provide value back to them directly? And so those are the things we're thinking about right now internally as an organization. Let's see. Do you have any words to share regarding accessibility requirements within Webflow? Other than Webflow's getting better at this, much better at this. They just released the inspector tool, the auditor little tool, and now you can kind of go and look for visual impairments. So you can set up for different color blindness or blurry vision and different things. And so I know Webflow is taking accessibility to heart. That's a big directive from Vlad all the way through the organization. And so I think, again, looking at what the WA2 standards, the web accessibility standards are, and kind of just making sure that your design checks as many of those boxes as possible. The hard thing about its accessibility is that you open yourself up to a lawsuit. The good thing is that, at least in the United States, there's only where you can be financially held liable for an accessibility claim, and that's Florida, Chicago, Illinois, California, and Hawaii. So unless you're in one of those 4 states, the only damages that can be gained are the cost to fix whatever's wrong from an accessibility standpoint. But if you are in one of those 4 states, Illinois, Florida, California, and Hawaii, you could be held financially responsible. And so again, it even comes down to what state you're in, how much you might have to worry about some of that. So okay, I think that's it. I think questions are good, and surprisingly, as a stat, we have more concurrent viewers, and our growth curve has looked up and to the right the entire time. If we look at this, I'll show you all in real time. But yeah, this is great. We love these numbers. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us. Any closing words, Joe? Final words?
If anybody has any technical questions on how they can get to that next level, if you think of something after, please send us a message, find us on one of our socials, send us an email, and tell us about it. We want to do more of this education, more of these types of shows, and really help you get to the next level if you want to get to the next level.
Great. All right. Well, with that, we'll send it off. Thanks, everyone, and we'll catch you next week, 12 o'clock. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, click that little notification bell, and let us know what else you might like to see us cover on these shows. Thanks, and catch you next time. Still live on YouTube for just a second here until that finishes. And we're off. Okay.